Hi, everybody. I'm Cindy Wigglesworth, and I'm looking forward to sharing some content with you today about spiritual intelligence, the SQ21 model, which I created, and how it is connected to integral theory. So I'm going to be doing a little screen sharing and conversation. Hopefully you'll find this helpful. Feel free to email me afterwards if you have any questions. All right, let's share screen. All right, here we go. So I believe that spiritual intelligence is an intelligence that is necessary in order to function at what we would call second tier developmental stages. I have some research to back that up, which I will share with you towards the end of this presentation. So let's get going. What we're going to cover in this presentation are the four intelligences of leaders, specifically physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. I'll give you a high-level review of how I think about these, which is also compatible with how Ken Wilber talks about lines of intelligence. We'll talk a little bit about how EQ and SQ are related to each other, because I believe you have to have some EQ in order to develop your SQ. We'll talk specifically about the SQ21 model, and I'll weave through this conversation how all of this is connected to integral theory and stages of development. My background, for those of you who don't know me, is I have a bachelor's and master's degree from Duke University. I spent 20 years at Exxon, which later became ExxonMobil, working in human resources, including in senior management positions. I was responsible in various times for leadership development work, and the issue of what makes a good leader was very much in my consciousness, both for me personally, how could I be a good leader, but also for the company, how could we help create good leaders? I left Exxon in 2000 and have been working in private practice since then. I left in order to be able to do the research I'm going to be telling you a little bit about, because I felt strongly that someone needed to do research around spiritual intelligence in a similar way to what had been done around emotional intelligence. The book that I wrote, called SQ21, The 21 Skills of Spiritual Intelligence, details everything I'm going to tell you today with more flesh on the bones, so to speak, around the 21 skills. So if you find this interesting, you might find the book very helpful. And also for you to know, I've been involved in the conscious capitalism movement since early in its inception. John Mackey, who co-founded Conscious Capitalism, has endorsed this model, as has Ken Wilber. So if you find either of those interesting, conscious capitalism or integral theory, they are connected as well to my model. How did I get interested in this? So I mentioned that I worked at ExxonMobil in human resources. And in my own life journey, I was overdeveloped in IQ when I came to the company. I think many of us experience this, that we go through high school and college with this super focus on SAT scores and grades and, graduating magna cum laude and trying to prove myself as a woman in particular. I really was determined to compete at the intellectual level. I'm also a Myers-Briggs thinking style, so this was sort of natural for me. I came into ExxonMobil and was successful as a professional fairly quickly, but I started getting feedback in my annual performance reviews that I would summarize as essentially saying, we know that you're really smart, we know that you're working really hard, but you might want to work on your interpersonal skills. Now, I like to say, when engineers tell you that you need to work on your interpersonal skills, well, you probably do. So I took that to heart, and I was doing some therapy at the time because I had been through a divorce, and I was learning a lot that I would now call emotional intelligence through therapy and through some of the leadership development courses I was attending. But emotional intelligence as a field did not exist back then. It was just interpersonal skills and learning to understand people's Myers-Briggs types and how do you run effective meetings, all of those things. It was helping me. I also found a new church and started going to a whole lot of spiritual workshops and reading avidly in the world of spirituality, multiple religions, all kinds of things, and searching for kind of the common ground of the faith traditions. This was before I found Ken Wilber, and I was doing this through all of these various workshops, but it felt very scattered to me. Like, oh, this is a Deepak Chopra workshop you should take, or oh, this is a so-and-so's workshop you should take, or this is a great Buddhist retreat, you should go on this. And in each of them, I would learn something, but it felt disconnected. Like, how do I connect these together and bring them practically into my life? Bit by bit, I was finding some skills that I was developing. And what shocked me was how much impact it had on my leadership skills. So as I was noticing this, I was becoming more effective. I was becoming more promotable. I was being given larger projects and more responsibility. And the thing that was different about me was something I couldn't discuss because it was a set of spiritual skills. And I thought, this is kind of nuts because it seems really essential to leadership that these kind of skills be available to people. Why can't I talk about it? Why are we so scared of this topic? So that question just stayed with me until it finally kind of started making me crazy. And I left the company to do the research, which I'll be sharing with you today. But essentially, I had proven in my own life that these skills mattered and were very helpful, not just to me in terms of my personal happiness, but also in terms of my personal growth and success, and I think my team's success and the company's success. Once I decided, I need a way to talk about spirituality that is not so scary, I looked to Maslow as one of my resources. I was reading very widely by this time in the fields of psychology, in business, in philosophy, and world religions. And Maslow's final book, The Farther Reaches of Human Nature, was published actually posthumously. It was a series of essays that he was putting together into a new book to say that his self-actualization model actually was missing a stage, that there was a stage of development above self-actualization. And he called these people that he was describing the self-actualizing self-transcenders, which is a very long name, but I call this stage in this chart just the self-transcendence level. And he described this as a significant loss of ego and a commitment to service of others. And he described also how these people seemed to recognize each other when they would connect. They would immediately see something in each other that they knew they could talk to, they could understand, they could share with. And this sounded a great deal to me like the move from ego self to higher self that is the foundation, I think, of the best of the world religions. So Maslow's hierarchy, which I'd always liked, but it felt like it stopped short, actually he was moving beyond into this higher level of self-transcendence. And this was my first introduction really to thinking hard about stages of development as he described this, and then also as I looked at Fowler's stages of faith. Fowler's stages of faith, a fantastic description of a Christian faith journey, moving from infancy through intuitive projective faith or the preschool stage to what would be called mythic literal, the mid-childhood phase. And you see I'm using some color coding here. And what I've done is gone back and looked at Fowler through the lens of spiral dynamics. So these are the spiral dynamics colors, but for those of you who know the Wilber colors, all of this obviously translates. So you've got this sort of early magenta or purple, moving into red, moving into synthetic conventional, which is blue or on the spiral, or amber in the Wilber model, where you have a traditionalist faith that is very driven to conform. In Suzanne Cook-Greuter's model, this is the conformist stage. And then you move from there, if you keep growing, to an individual reflective faith, also referred to as the searcher, and often happens in young adulthood. And this is frequently when people leave the church. They feel like they want to be able to do critical thinking around the doctrine of the church, but the conventional or traditionalist orientation will not allow for that much questioning if it's a very closed traditionalist organization. So people will often leave the church, but if the church is large enough to hold it, this is a period of time for re-examining everything they believed through fresh eyes, more reflective thought process, more critical thought process, and coming to their faith more choicefully, as opposed to just conforming to the faith. This is reflected in Christianity in a document analysis orientation towards the Bible. A fantastic reflection of this would be the Jesus Seminar, for any of you who are familiar with that work, where they analyze the New Testament with a deep questioning of which of these things is actually historically true and which of these things did Jesus actually say. So it's really quite interesting. From there, you move to what we might call green, or what Fowler called conjunctive faith in middle adulthood, which is more broadening to see the truth in other religions and to include more philosophy and include more perspectives. And at level 7, the highest level described is a universalizing faith, which also might be referred to as the saint, who has hit that place of sort of Gandhi and the Dalai Lama and maybe the people we most admire, who can see the truth of it all and are much less attached to any one tradition, but can also see that having a tradition is useful. Like at green, we might scatter across it all and not drill deep on anything. But when you get to 7, there's kind of a value in see the truth in all, but pick something and drill your well deep. So I was really attracted to Fowler. And if you are familiar with Ken Wilber's book, which I'm holding up here, I don't know if it's visible, The Religion of Tomorrow. Let me come back a little bit, there we go. Ken Wilber, The Religion of Tomorrow, in chapter 7, he describes the structure stages of development, and he talks about Fowler's stages and how important they are to understanding spiritual intelligence. He also references my work on SQ21, so big thank you to Ken for that. When I first started doing this work, I hadn't met Ken Wilber's work yet. I hadn't been introduced to it, but I did find through doing some research in the Harvard Business Review, the 7 Transformations of a Leader article, which then led me on to find Suzanne Cook-Greuter's work. And I got certified in her tool probably in 2001 or 2, and really loved the impulsive, opportunist, diplomat hierarchy that you see here. On the left, conventional stages in her model are the diplomat or conformist, the expert, which straddles between blue and orange, or amber and orange, depending on which model you're using, and the achiever. Those 3 stages make up the bulk of what I was working with in corporate America, both as a consultant and a coach. And a few people were more in the impulsive opportunist stage. So it was allowing me to see my coaching clientele through a lens that was super helpful. And then the move to post-conventional. I hadn't met the spiral dynamics model yet, but I was certified in Suzanne Cook-Greuter's model and really enjoying learning about it and thinking about how is this individualist, strategist, alchemist levels connected to the Fowler stages of development, and how might it be connected to the SQ21 model, which I had already been working on. What I will come back to at the end of this presentation is a conversation of the research I ended up doing, cross-correlating the SQ21 model to Suzanne Cook-Greuter's maturity assessment profile. And you'll see it's a very strong positive correlation between these 2 things, and a big nod of gratitude to Suzanne for helping me with that research. You see on the right-hand column here, a equation to where I think these model on the left, the Suzanne Cook-Greuter model, maps to the Don Beck spiral dynamics integral model, which of course actually originated with Claire Graves, but the colors were added later with the help of Graves, Beck, and Cohen working together. This is the Claire Graves developmental model, which I found after I found Ken. So through Suzanne, I found Ken Wilber's work. Through Ken Wilber, I found spiral dynamics. Through spiral dynamics, I went and got certified in that as well. And the aha moment for me in adding this developmental model to my toolkit was the left right that you see here, where the warm colors tend to focus as stages on me and my growth and expressing myself as an individual into the world. And the right-hand stages tend to focus on sacrificing the self for the good of the community. This is a core polarity which manifests itself in every society's development and in every individual's development. Getting at least to level 4 blue is essential for a society to function well. When a society is at red, it's a warlord society and might makes right. But to create law and order required the step up to blue. And this model gave me a deep appreciation of blue that I think I had been lacking before. I had been judging the conformist stage on Suzanne Cook-Reuter's model as kind of, yeah, you got to go through it. There's no skipping stages in any of these models, but you don't want to stay stuck at conformist. That's bad. I started appreciating more deeply as I worked with these models how important each stage is. You can't skip one, but really what deep gratitude we need to have historically to the emergence of blue, and how when blue is eroded in a society, which we have seen some of recently, we lose faith in law and order. You start down spiraling into red. So all of this has over time factored into how I teach spirituality and spiritual intelligence. And I will define my terms here very soon. All right. One last comment on Ken Wilber's theory, and then we will dive into spiritual intelligence in particular. This is a summary of Ken Wilber's AQUIL map, all quadrants, all lines, all levels of reality, or an overview of, very simplified overview of integral theory. I like to say there's 5 things you got to know to understand the world, and these are the 5. That there are stages of or levels of development, and in the stages model, I've in particular trained in spiral dynamics and in Suzanne Cook-Reuter's model. I've also taken a class with Keegan on his model of development and his subject-object interview process, and love all of that work. I really find value in each of them. They each bring something different. But we need to understand stages. We need to understand lines of intelligence, whether they be IQ, EQ, SQ, or you can list additional lines. States of consciousness, which of course are temporary, momentary kinds of things, like you can be awake or you can be asleep, or you can have transcendent experiences of oneness with the universe. And then there are his 4 quadrants and types of people, like Myers-Briggs is a typology, for example, that I have used a lot and I've enjoyed a lot. The first 3 are bolded, stages, lines, and states, because you will see these reflected in my model. All right, so let's go forward from there. I did also, of course, think about the 4 quadrants and the types, but they're not as emphasized here. Let's talk about intelligences in general, and then we'll get into spiritual intelligence. When you go to the world of psychology, where intelligences tend to be most studied, you also find it in like the Harvard Department of Education. A lot of good work has taken place there. Intelligence can have a very lengthy definition. I've distilled the definitions that are out there into what I think are their 2 key points. Intelligence is an innate potential that is brought into form through practice. What does that mean? There is something inside of us that has a potential, but is just a potential until we do something with it. The image here of the little girl playing the piano is an illustration of perhaps she is born with high musical intelligence as an innate potential, but in order to bring that into form, she would need to practice an instrument. In this case, she's learning the piano, and learn about music theory so that she could bring fully into form her potential for musical intelligence. The end result of developing an intelligence is that you get some kind of behavior that you want. You get an appropriately reasoned behavior or choice, is how it tends to be framed. If you're working on emotional intelligence, you get good interpersonal skills, for example. When I work in the corporate world, and I think this is true in our personal lives, but it's certainly true in any form of leadership, There are a minimum of 4 types of intelligence that we need to look at, and these are the 4. On the right hand is PQ, which is physical intelligence. On the left hand is IQ, cognitive or intellectual intelligence, EQ, emotional intelligence, and then SQ as spiritual intelligence. These are color coded to roughly represent the spiral. So PQ is a high focus at beige, which is the infancy and early childhood stage, and also early humanity. It's not to say it's unimportant as we go on, and I will talk more about that on the next slide. The purpose of this image is to show you that to some degree, the lines of intelligence develop separately. Now, this is partially true. PQ can be highly developed, and other intelligences might be at different places on this bar graph. So you could be well developed on PQ and low on IQ, or high on IQ. You could be well developed in PQ or low on PQ and high on a cognitive. So there's some degree of independence of these lines. There is, as I will talk about, also some degree of interconnection of these lines. But here I've roughly put IQ in orange, which meaning to fully inhabit orange as a stage in a healthy, successful way, development of IQ is very helpful. EQ, essential, I think, for green. It's really hard to have a healthy manifestation, a healthy behavioral set at green if you have not developed some emotional intelligence. I'll talk more about that when we get to that model. And then SQ, I think, is essential for second tier, which includes yellow and turquoise on the spiral. Doesn't mean you can't develop it earlier. You can develop EQ earlier than green. You can develop IQ earlier than orange. But the emphasis for me on this connection of structures, of stages, and their intelligence connection is depicted by these colors. Here's the other way I like to display it, which is also partially true. It is partially true that these occur somewhat in a sequence, that PQ is the first thing newborn infants are really focusing hard on. Can they focus their eyes? Can they lift their head? Can they learn to roll over? Can they learn to crawl? And then walking, and then running, and tying shoelaces. It's not to say that IQ is not simultaneously developing. Of course it is. But it's just sort of developmentally, we might say the preschool years are a lot of PQ, as well as beginning verbal intelligence, of course, and some basic reasoning skills are beginning at that time. We enter school, and most schools tend to focus really heavily on IQ development. You might think about college entrance exams, such as the SAT. There's often a real emphasis on getting people ready to pass whatever the tests are that are required for them to go to the next level of schooling. Math and verbal intelligences tend to be heavily emphasized here. We get out of high school or college or trade school, and we move into more of an adult responsibility level of having a job, maybe having a committed relationship, having to pay rent, try and either pay for a car or afford some form of transportation, maybe buy a mortgage, get a mortgage at some point. All of this working and team building and maybe supervising people or successfully navigating our romantic relationships requires a lot of emotional intelligence. The research on EQ changes all the time, so please take what I'm saying as what I know as of this point in time, and neuroscience will keep advancing this for us. But the most recent understanding that I've heard of is that EQ is connected to many parts of the brain, but one of them is our prefrontal cortex right behind our forehead. And that portion of the brain comes fully online sometime between age 22 and 25. And it enables many things, including impulse control and overall executive functioning, meaning making good decisions. Teenagers are notorious for making poor decisions, impulsive decisions. That's because this has not come online fully. As we mature between age 22 and 25, and again, some people, this may happen sooner, but the idea is that we have available to us the ability to develop our interpersonal skills. Aging alone is not sufficient. You can grow old and never develop your interpersonal skills, but there is some degree of age correlation to when these become fully available. As I have thought about this over the years, I have come to believe that EQ, some amount of EQ, is foundational to SQ. SQ builds upon empathy and self-awareness developed at the EQ level to develop the ability to see with compassion and wisdom. As we develop our compassion and wisdom, we are able to really be much more effective as leaders. SQ, as I will define, also includes this ability to maintain a perspective that enables inner calm as well as outer calm. So we'll talk more about this as we move forward. What's included in physical intelligence? Well, when I work with people and when I work with myself on maintaining good physical intelligence, I ask questions about how are you sleeping? Are you getting good exercise? Are you maintaining a healthy diet? How is your stamina? How's your overall health? Are you doing things that demonstrate good body care, like stretching, doing things that are relaxation focused? Are you focusing on various brainwave states? States is one of the 5 things in Ken Wilber's theory. Are you doing things that can keep you maybe in an alpha state or get you into deep REM when you're sleeping? Are you thinking about those kinds of things? IQ is obviously our cognitive skills. As we think about any profession has a certain amount of technical skills, no matter what it is, whether you are working in fast food and you have to manage the flow of customers and think about the temperature of the deep fryer and keep all those things juggling. There's things to know. Supply chain management is always an issue in any retail establishment. So there's a lot to think about, no matter what your situation is, what kind of job you're in. And physical intelligence is at the bottom of the pyramid because I think it's helpful to remember if we don't take care of our body, if we're tired, if sugar is running low, we haven't been getting any exercise or managing our stress, it can impact our ability to think. It can impact our IQ. It can also impact our interpersonal skills. So building these from the bottom up and thinking about PQ as a foundation is useful. Now let's talk about EQ and SQ. In my experience, EQ is necessary to begin the development of our spiritual intelligence skills. That's not to say people can't have state experiences as young children that give them huge insights into the world, but a state experience is temporary. Stages are structures. They take a long time to build, and you have to sort of build up to them. So my understanding of how this works is you need some of that EQ work to build the skill set at SQ. And then, as you will see, you can have EQ and SQ at blue, orange, green, and second tier, but it becomes essential for second tier, not optional for second tier. So what are each of these things? Let's talk about EQ in a little more detail, and then we'll get into detail on SQ. When I began doing this work, I was trained in a model that Richard Boyatzis and Daniel Goleman were using at that time. They have since both upgraded their models, but this basic is still true. And this was how I was thinking at the time I created SQ, so I want you to see it. This model of EI, as they called it, had 4 quadrants, which began in the upper left with self-awareness. Self-awareness feeds into both social awareness and self-management skills, and the outcome is good relationship skills. Now, these 4 quadrants would map on top of Ken Wilber's top 2 quadrants. Don't worry about it, don't get too confused, but these are not Wilber's model. These are the emotional intelligence 4 quadrants where you have interior on the left and exterior or focused outside on the right. Internal self is self-awareness. Internal action is self-management. External focus of awareness is social awareness. External behaviors or actions are relationship skills or social skills. So you have to start with self-awareness in this model, and they had plenty of research on this, in order to get to good relationship skills. These are the skills that were populating these quadrants at that time. They have had various numbers of skills in here, and Daniel Goleman has kind of split his model now into emotional intelligence on the left and social intelligence on the right, I believe. But in any event, what still holds true are the three that are bolded in yellow as absolutely essential, gotta have them skills. Emotional self-awareness means I understand my emotions at the time that I'm having them, and I understand what triggered them. This is really hard work. It seems easy, but the ability to appropriately understand I'm angry, and I'm angry because what you just did triggered me, enables me to then look at the trigger and to start thinking deeply about what interpretation did I have of that situation that triggered me. Until you see the pattern of triggers, it's hard to do the deeper reframing, which is the deeper work of spiritual intelligence. Empathy essentially means I can feel with you. At the simplest level, it's a gut relationship. It's affective empathy, which means your face, your body language, I can just get the vibe of it, the energy of it right directly into my body. And I kind of can feel that you are upset, or I can feel that you're grieving and you're sad, or I can feel that you're exhausted and burned out. Cognitive empathy can also be very helpful here, where if you're struggling a bit with affective empathy, which Myers-Briggs T's sometimes do, Myers-Briggs F's tend to be naturally good at affective empathy, but T's may come at it more cognitively, is to learn to say, wow, if I were in that situation, what just happened would make me mad. I can kind of map that over and say, this person might be angry. And then ask a question, are you angry? So I understand my anger. I'm cluing in better to your anger. Can I self-control? When I get angry, can I manage myself? If I can do all of that, I have a chance of being good at conflict management in the lower right-hand quadrant. I'll be better at teamwork. I'll be better at influencing and communicating and being an inspirational leader. So those three that are in yellow were a big focus for me as I was thinking about my model and as I was creating my model. Long story short, to get EQ, you start with self-awareness in order to get good relationship skills. How do you find out how you're doing? How do you learn about how you're showing up? You have to have feedback. And it's super important in the EQ models that there be some kind of feedback model. Often it's a 360-degree assessment, but we need some feedback model from people who love us, from people we work with, that tell us how we're showing up so that we can become more self-aware. All right, let's move from that to spiritual intelligence. And before I define my terms for you, I want you to think about how you think of spiritual leadership. I love to do this in person. We're not in person, so you can do this for yourself on a piece of paper or just in your mind. But think about, in your mind, some people who you admire, who you would consider to be spiritual leaders by whatever definition that is meaningful to you. Who do you admire? Admire is a crucial word that you consider to be spiritual leaders. They can be alive or dead, they could be fictional, and they do not need to be perfect, because I don't know even that any of them have ever been perfect. After you do that, describe the character traits that cause you to admire these people. What is it about them that makes them different, more than the average person? When I ask this question in groups, and I've done this in many different places around the world, the kind of lists I get will include major religious figures, and it might include Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, Moses, Abraham, Lord Krishna, various saints like Mother Teresa, the Dalai Lama, etc. I would also typically get political leaders who have been exemplary agents of positive change. People like Gandhi, who could appear in either category, same for Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr., Thich Nhat Hanh, could be listed in either category. Often I'll find people list relatives or teachers, local religious leaders, authors that they've been impacted by, or TV personalities, and sometimes coworkers. I've even had bosses be listed, which I like to kind of joke and say, see, it is possible for a boss to be a spiritual leader. Then I say, well, what are the character traits that cause you to admire these people? And to me, this is the juice. It's not the names, although the names are helpful when people start realizing, hey, a whole lot of us have the same names. And not only that, but it was on Cindy's slide that she wrote before this presentation. So clearly a lot of people around the world say these same names. But more interesting even to me are the character traits. And this is a high-level summary of the kinds of words that we would get going around the room, having people flip chart. What are the character traits? You don't have to connect this to a specific leader. It's more like generically, what are the character traits of spiritual leaders? And these words like being loving, compassionate, humble, wise, courageous, faithful, forgiving, accepting, calm and centered, having integrity, authenticity, being honest, being peaceful or nonviolent, being outstanding teachers, being able to inspire other people, being great leaders, being persistent in the face of tremendous difficulty, seeing the gifts inside of other people and helping them develop. So this is a short list. Then there's longer words and synonyms, but you get the idea. And then I ask people from their flip charts, are there any characteristics on this list that you do not want to see in your workplace? And there's usually a lot of head scratching and people go, well, no, I want all of that. I want all of that that's up there. And one time I had a woman say, well, I'm not sure about compassion. And I asked her why. And this was at a hospital and she was in the oncology area. And she said, I'm worried that if I'm too empathic with my patients, I can't do what is necessary to save their lives. And her specialty was head and neck cancers. And she said, the surgeries I perform deform people. It saves their lives, but it deforms them. And they are heartbroken oftentimes with what happens because of this choice to save their lives. And so we had a wonderful conversation about the difference between empathy, which is feeling with someone's grief in this example, and compassion, which is the larger, more inclusive, able to hold the grief and to see with love and connect to the wisdom that this person wants to live. And that's the bigger choice. And once we had that conversation, she's like, I'm totally on board. I want that. I want that. So now that you've defined a spiritual leader, let's talk about what is spiritual intelligence in the larger context of three things that get confused: spirituality, religion, and spiritual intelligence. So what do I mean by spirituality? I mean an innate human need to be connected to something larger than ourselves, something we consider to be sacred or noble, or you might prefer the word divine. So an innate human need links us back to Maslow, and the need to be connected to something larger, he would argue, and I would agree, is an innate part of the human self. If it is not developmentally stunted by environmental or biological limitations, such as trauma could potentially stunt this or enhance it. Some people have an enhanced spirituality as a result of trauma, but trauma can be an unpredictable thing. Social ceilings, things that limit your ability to express, maybe beyond red warlord consciousness, or potentially brain damage where you just really can't function at a higher level. So spirituality is innate. A lot of times people will say, well, everyone's born spiritually intelligent. And I will say, well, actually, I'd be a little more specific. I'd say we are all born spiritual with the innate human need to be connected to something larger. But whether or not we bring that into form through practice is the next and separate question. So we'll get to that one on spiritual intelligence. But just to clarify, the elephant in the room is often religion. People will say, are you trying to convert me to some religion? Is this really religion in a box? What is going on here? And I talk about spirituality is innate. Religion is a structure that humans create to help us meet our spiritual needs. In its best form, it does that. In its toxic form, it can stunt that. It can interfere with the expression or the satisfaction of our spiritual hunger. But religion is a man-made structure. It involves sacred texts, which you may believe have been divinely delivered to you, but then there's a structure around it of teachers, priests, imams, whichever, a cohort of practitioners who become a sangha or a community of practice, and a whole bunch potentially of rituals and sacred places that are designed to help us meet our spiritual need. But spirituality is the big word, religion is the smaller word. You can be spiritual without being religious. Now, as I thought about what do I mean by spiritual intelligence, what is it bringing into form? And to me, it is bringing love into form. The essence of all the world traditions in their best is love, a commitment to love. But love is such a complicated word and sloppy kind of in English. We don't really know what we mean by that. So I went looking for a definition that did not involve using Greek or Latin words and that was simple, easy to remember. And I found this parable from the Eastern traditions that says, love is a bird with two wings. One wing is wisdom, the other wing is compassion. If either wing is broken, the bird cannot fly. And it just touched me. It made me get goosebumps all over. I still get goosebumps from this definition. And to me, it felt so beautifully true. It was love in action, requiring the best of the heart, compassion, and the most developed of the mind, wisdom, together in loving action. So that was my beginning. You can now see where this definition of spiritual intelligence is connected to that. So as I define spiritual intelligence, it is the ability to behave with wisdom and compassion while maintaining inner and outer peace, regardless of the situation. So that inner and outer peace means it's not just on the outside, which is fine. Staying calm on the outside is a good first step. And I see this with nurses, for example. They really have to maintain that ability to be calm on the outside. But also being calm on the inside is a deep level of self-mastery where the turmoil of the world is present in your consciousness, but is not sucking the life out of you. It is not exhausting you and burning you out to be present to it. You're holding some different space around it that you can be peaceful in the face of the world and its suffering. So regardless of the situation, you have the ability to behave with love while maintaining inner and outer peace. So to me, this described all those spiritual leaders that I admire and that maybe you admire. So how do I get there? The how is really important to me. How can I get to a place of showing up this way? Well, I wanted to understand these terms a little better, and then I wanted to describe the skills. So we will move now into an understanding of what it is. So the meat's coming, so hang on there. As I looked at compassion, I thought about it as initially a 4-level hierarchy of starting at apathy, which is I don't care about you, to sympathy, which is more like pity. I notice that you're suffering, but I'm still one up, one down over you. I'm pitying you, but at least I notice you're suffering, and maybe I'll write a check to the Red Cross so they will help you. To empathy, which is peer-to-peer feeling of being with someone. I am with you. I'm walking the journey with you. Empathy has certain brain activity that is documented to go with it, which also includes a tendency to want to pull away from the suffering of others. There is an activation in the part of the brain that wants to self-protect and pull back. So empathy can burn you out, but the research around compassion-trained monks has shown us that at the next level, you keep the best of empathy, but you deactivate the part of the brain that wants to pull away. You're able to stay engaged. And there's actually a reward mechanism that kicks in at this level of compassion where you are rewarded for engaging and helping. So there's a developmental step, which I would see as moving from green to yellow plus between empathy and compassion. If you're going to get to yellow plus, I think you need that ability to have compassion. Doesn't mean you can't have it sooner developmentally, but would need it going higher. I've added antipathy recently to the bottom of this because we've become pretty judgy and mean as a society in the last decade, where we are busy judging other people and disliking them without even knowing them. As soon as we put them in a bracket of you believe this politically, we quickly judge and disdain or even hate those people. And a lot of violence recently has been connected to this shadow projection and this extreme antipathy that we're feeling towards people. So in some cases, getting back to apathy would be an improvement. Could we just not care about each other's political parties quite so much, or not care about the color of people's skin quite so much, or which church or faith they practice quite so much? Can we get to apathy? which is more like tolerance. Tolerance is a word that irritates people, but when it's a step up from violence, it's a good step. The other category is wisdom. The 4 stages I used to use began with data, which is just there's information out there. And if you take the data and you accumulate it and you categorize it, you might have information. If you work with the information over time, you develop knowledge. If you work with knowledge across time and factor in the human variables and the multitude of perspectives and the irrationality of things that can happen, as well as the rationality of things that can happen, you become more wise. And wisdom and compassion will connect to each other. They need each other. Disinformation has been added at the bottom because similarly in the last decade or so, it's become rampant and very concerning that the opposite of actual fact is being shared widely and believed because it conforms to a pre-existing or desired worldview or conforms to a tribe. The overall goal of spiritual intelligence is to help us move from an immature sense of self being tied to an ego. And I don't demonize the ego. I think the ego is absolutely necessary. It's a sense of who we are in the dualistic expression that we are in human form. But it begins immature and it goes through the developmental stages of becoming more mature. When we are immature, we're self-obsessed, as this guy combing his hair is, his one hair that he might have left. Or this woman who's blaming and pointing the finger. We become very self-defended and self-concerned at the immature stages. As we mature, we become less of those things, and we'll talk about what that looks like. Synonyms are important. I have glossaries on my website. If you're interested, you can go to deepchange.com under resources, and we have glossaries of these terms for the major world religions and the generic glossary that we use as well. Some people might prefer terms like personality self or embodied self or the human self. I use ego self as my generic term. We're shifting away from just being run by our ego to a more mature sense of self that integrates what I call our higher self. And this is a generic term that is designed to embrace many other terms, which I'll show you on the next page. These 2 images I just love. The woman on the left is laughing, even though it looks like she has almost no teeth left. It's like, I'm not worried about my looks. I'm just joyfully present in this moment. And the fellow on the right just seems to have on his face, to me, and this could be my projection, of course, but it appears to me he's seen a lot of suffering and there's still something gratefully present and humble and just able to feel some joy and presence in this moment, maybe some gratitude. Synonyms for the higher self can include words like my soul or my spirit, Atman, the Christ consciousness, Buddha nature, my divine nature, my non-dual self, my witnessing self, my authentic self, and so on. If my generic word higher self doesn't appeal to you, then you can use whichever word you like. The ego is the part of us that is fearful, angry, and separated from other people. It feels like I'm over here and you're over there, and there's some competition for resources or attention or success or whatever. The ego is easily threatened. It likes drama. And like I said, I don't demonize it. It is necessary for us to function in this world. What we want is to grow it up, mature it. But understanding that it's prone to overreacting is the first step in moving towards a more spiritually intelligent response. Our higher self or our spirit is the part that's more connected to compassion and wisdom and peace and seeks unity with something larger than ourselves. Whether we call that source or God or higher power, many synonyms are available, or connect with a noble or sacred cause. My goal, as I think of it, is to have the ego out of the driver's seat of my life and move it over to the navigator seat. Let the higher self be in charge of my life, but ego has useful information, and ego can provide that information as I navigate the world of other egos and having to show up as a person. I'm a human being. I have a personality. How do I navigate the road? How do I successfully steer my way through life? So having these 2 partner is the vision that I hold. When I went to create this model, I began by thinking about the EQ model that had so impacted me. And I thought there's something different about these spiritual leaders that is more than emotional intelligence. It's the next step. What is more? So I thought of EQ here and SQ here. And what if there was a 4-quadrant step up, modeled not on the 4 quadrants of Wilber, but on the 4 quadrants of Goleman and Boyatzis from that original model? What would it look like? And how would these spiritual leaders, how would their skills populate this? I had a wonderful focus group I worked with as I did a draft of this, and we worked through it, but essentially came up with 21 skills of spiritual intelligence, 5 in each quadrant, except for quadrant 2, which just seemed to want to have 6. So we have 21 skills. The upper left quadrant, instead of being self-awareness in the Goleman model, is ego self, higher self awareness. And there's 5 pieces to that here, including awareness of ego self and higher self as a specific skill, and then things like being aware of your life purpose and being aware of your own worldview. Universal awareness is my awareness of others, where empathy occurs in the EQ skill. This is where deep compassion gets built, because I come to understand deeply the interconnection of life, the awareness of other people's worldviews, and a very much I can see that perspective point of view, and having potentially transcendent experiences, state experiences of connection with others and with all life. In quadrant 3, I'm managing myself at such a level that my higher self is in charge, at least most of the time. And in the 4th quadrant, I develop social mastery and spiritual presence, which enables me to show up as a wise and effective teacher and a wise and effective leader, make compassionate and wise decisions, be a calming and healing presence, and align intuitively, internally, sensing the ebb and flow of life. So great, I described these, wonderful. Now what do I do with it? And knowing that my client base, my intention was to take this back into corporations, I needed to have a fairly rigorous perspective. Like if I were an engineer, what would I say about this? And I'd want to know, is this thing legit? So because I wanted it to be legit, I wanted it to have an appropriate level of rigor to be responsible, I hired PhDs to help me. I have a master's, but not a PhD. So I hired PhDs to help me with the various levels of constructing this assessment and researching this assessment. The details of all of that are available under resources on my website. I'm going to only give you one piece of research at the end of this. And secondly, in order to make this work in a business setting or anywhere, I wanted it to be skills focused, not belief focused, because when we get into people's beliefs, we get into all kind of crazy. Oh, no, that's not how I see God. Oh, you don't believe in hell and I believe in hell, or I don't believe in rebirth and you believe in rebirth, or whatever. I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to exclude atheists. I didn't want to get into any kind of thing that obstructed what the goal was, which was for us to have a set of skills that would help us show up as love in the world. So I made sure that whatever we did was described as skill focused, not belief focused, to the degree possible. Here is skill 5, awareness of ego self and higher self. The second level of work after saying, okay, these are the 21 skills. Now, how do you describe those skills in ways that you can develop them? Level 1 in each skill is the beginner level. It's a step up from not having started. So there is a 0 implied, but at level 1, you have a basic understanding in this skill that you have an ego self. That's all you need for level 1. At level 2, you can observe your own ego in operation. At level 3, you've been observing long enough that you recognize the pattern, the situations, and the types of people that tend to trigger your ego and make the ego want to take charge, perhaps in a way that's not going to yield a loving result. At level 4, you're getting pretty advanced now. You can consistently hear the voice of your higher self. And at level 5, the voice of the higher self is the principal voice you hear. And ego is no longer in combat with that voice. Ego has figured out the best way it can be important is to be useful to the higher self. So it is now in joyful service to whatever you might call that, spirit, higher self, soul, etc. Skill 7 is awareness of other people's worldviews. And here's how that develops from level 1 to level 5. At level 1, you at least can listen to differing points of view. At level 2, you seek opportunities to learn. So you're proactively seeking opportunities to learn about other worldviews. At level 3, you tune into other people's worldviews, even during a conflict. At level 4, you have compassion for the hopes and fears that we can experience as human beings. It's universal, this human experience. We're all kind of terrified of it, and we all have suffering in our lives. And as we see that, and we see each other as having human reactions to human experiences, we drop some of our judgment and develop a deeper understanding that can go beyond empathy to compassion. At level 5, I can see through the perspective of others, all others, any other, even those who might act to harm me. So that's a pretty saintly level. I developed these descriptions as I was holding in mind sort of Maslow's hierarchy, the stages of faith. And then later, as I came to understand Suzanne Cook-Greuter's work and the other developmental models, I kind of would go back and cross-check and see if these stages made sense, these developmental 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 developmental skills made sense relative to the development of the stages. And it did make sense intuitively. Now, when I get asked for the quick summary, how can I become more spiritually intelligent? This is it. This is the simplest description I know. Between the events in your life and your responses to the events, learn to insert a pause. In the pause is your power. In the pause is your choice. You can choose to respond from ego, or you can stop and take a deep breath and choose to respond from a higher place, from your higher self. And that response might be something you say, something you think, something you ruminate on and just make yourself crazy, things you say or things you do. So thoughts, emotions, speech, and action can all come from how you handle the pause. As you work on relationship skills by getting feedback, it's also useful to get feedback on your spiritual intelligence skills. And as you get feedback from others, hopefully over time, you will develop all of these things: social mastery and spiritual presence, being wise and effective, making compassionate and wise decisions, be a calming and healing presence in the world, and feel more aligned with the intelligence of life, the ebb and flow of life. So let me now move from describing the 21 skills to describing its relationship to a really fun piece of research that I did with Suzanne Cook-Greuter. Again, deep bow of gratitude to her. What we did was, as she had people come to her website to take the sentence completion test, SCTI for integral, which generated the maturity assessment profile, profiling them across the stages. Where are they in terms of a bar chart, which would look, like a peak and a tailing off. So you'd see sort of where your responses are arrayed. Each person who came to her website to do that was offered the opportunity for no additional cost to take the SQ21, which enabled me to get data set to compare. So in that 139 person data sample, we found, let me skip over that complexity of reasoning was extremely highly correlated to complexity of reasoning in my model, very strongly correlated to stages of development. So stages of development is not related to IQ. When I say complexity of reasoning, what I'm taking here into consideration is number of perspectives you can hold. So what do you consider as data or evidence? Do you look long-term as well as short-term? How do you evaluate information? What data do you use to support your stance? Do you look at multiple people's perspectives, and can you handle ambiguity? So complexity of reasoning, which is Suzanne's way of looking at it, was highly correlated to my skill 4 around complexity of thinking. Overall, what I found was that higher stages are crucial to respond to the life conditions that we are facing in the world, that higher SQ is highly correlated with those higher stages. And we need PQ, IQ, EQ, and SQ to move into the higher stages, but that SQ is a crucial skill not attended to sufficiently for world leaders, for evolved voters, for evolved citizens to develop if we're going to respond to the very complex life conditions that we are facing in the world, such as climate change. Again, reminding you of Suzanne Cook-Greuter's model before I show you the results. I have a results table. It's coming next. And on that results table, it's going to show you the stages of Suzanne Cook-Greuter's model across the bottom, which include these pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional stages. The diplomat, expert, and achiever being the conventional stages, and the individualist and beyond being the post-conventional, or green and beyond on the spiral. Here's the result. What you see on this chart is from diplomat, which was the lowest stage we had data for, to the ironist, which was the highest stage we had data for, which would be moving into kind of turquoise territory at this point. We had a steady upward purple line of graphing the mean. Now, let me help you read the mean. This scale goes from 0 to 100 on the left. There are 21 skills. You can score between 0 and 5 on the 21 skills. The maximum score theoretically possible is 105. Nobody had that. So we just stopped this at 100. But between 0 and 100, you can see there's a steady uptick in the average or the mean, starting at just above 50 for the diplomat, to moving up to the individualist, who's just above 65, to the strategist, who's just above 70, to the ironist, which was a small data set, but is getting close to 90 at that point. So there's a very steady upward growth in the average SQ score correlating to the stage of development. Another fascinating piece, though, is to look at the achiever, which is the third vertical red line. Achiever scores varied from like about 22 to about 87, with an average in the high 50s. What that tells me is achiever, which is orange on the spiral, can be low SQ or high SQ. Now, the advantage of a high SQ achiever would be someone at healthy orange, ideally expressing in a healthy way in an orange center of gravity, which is essential for the functioning of our society. There is nothing wrong with any of these stages when they are healthily expressed. So you can have a fairly big variation between what might be an unhealthy expression of orange and a healthier expression of orange. But then as you move beyond achiever, you see the minimum scores go up pretty steadily. The minimum individualist looks like about 39. The minimum strategist looks like about 46 or so. The minimum magician is in the low to middle 50s. And then the minimum ironist is in 80. So as you move up, SQ becomes really essential as a set of skills for you to be identified on the maturity assessment profile as what we would call second tier. So given the strength and the validation work that Suzanne Cook-Greuter has already done on her tool and correlating it to meaningful stages of development and human growth, tacking on SQ to that credible assessment means that my assessment, which was traditionally validated, cross-correlates with her assessment, which is validated, to tell us with a high probability that you need these SQ skills in order to be at the higher or second tier and beyond levels of development, yellow, turquoise, and beyond. So helping people move from profiles that might look like this to profiles that might look more like this would help create more transformational leaders and help us move into higher stages, more effectiveness in the world. If we're going to deal with all of the political complexity, all of the difficulties that climate change is going to present to us, it will be very important for leaders, especially for everyone, but especially leaders, to spend time developing their spiritual intelligence skills. I hope you have found this to be helpful. If you have any additional questions, I'd be delighted to be in communication with you. Please send me a note at cindy@deepchange.com. You can also go to the website, deepchange.com, and you will find a lot of resources available, video clips. I have 2 TEDx talks posted there and a white paper on the deep intelligence of leaders that you might find interesting. So please let me know if you have questions. And if you're interested in taking an SQ assessment, that material is available online as well. Thank you so much. I look forward to hopefully hearing from some of you. Thank you. Bye-bye.